7 International Conference on Open Courseware and eLearning. The theme of today is the challenge faced by the application of eLearning and Open Courseware. Please turn off your cell phone during the conference. 各位长官贵宾，大家好，欢迎参加2007年开放式课程与数位学习创新应用研讨会第2天的课程。那会议期间请关闭手机，如果有要进出会场的话，请后门的会场出入。Okay. Please welcome our first speaker, Stephen Dons, Senior Researcher from National Research Council.
Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you for coming out here early in the morning. It's my pleasure to be here in Taipei. This is my first time in Asia, so it has been a lot of excitement and a thrill for me, and so I thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me. I've brought a little bit of my country with me. I have some postcards, and if you'll look, there are people distributing these postcards. So there they go now. And these are images of the country where I come from and the province where I come from of New Brunswick, Canada, which is in the east coast of Canada. So I hope you'll take some and enjoy them. My talk today is on the trends and impacts of eLearning 2.0. It may not seem to be directly addressed toward Open Courseware, but I believe that it is. Basically, what I'll be talking about are the forces and the technologies that will shape the way we create open learning resources in the future. I was here yesterday, of course, and I was here listening to the talks from the other people who were presenting. And we had talks from the Open Courseware Consortium, we had talks from the Open University, and I realized that the story of Open Courseware so far is the story of activities by institutions. And we were presented with these timelines, like the MIT Open Courseware project. We got a timeline. Now, I'm not an institution. I'm not a big company. I don't have, press releases and things like that. But I thought, well, I can have a timeline. So I made myself a timeline. And what this timeline is my activities in this field, my activities in the area of open learning. And for me, it begins a long time ago. It begins even before 1994. But I'll begin with 1994. When I worked for Athabasca University, I created a bulletin board system so that people could call up and get resources. Although that didn't work so well because I was living in Alberta, which is a very large province, and all the calls were long distance, and I couldn't afford that. But then I got onto the internet, and I started working with online games, particularly things called MUDs, which are multi-user domains, places where many users come on at the same time. And then eventually I started working on the World Wide Web. And one of the first things I did, and this was back in 1995, is I created something called Stephen's Guide to the Logical Fallacies. And it's still out there on the internet if you look for it today. And there was no Creative Commons or Open Courseware at the time, but I created this resource for people to learn about logic and logical fallacies, and I created an open license for it so that it could be freely shared, and it was freely shared. And even to this day, I'm probably more known as the person who wrote logical fallacies than I am the person who does e-learning. With my work at Assiniboine Community College, we developed many online courses, including the certificate for adult education, which was the first online course in Manitoba, Canada. And we also created the General Business Certificate Online, which was a whole series of online courses. I wrote a paper called The Future of Online Learning, which again I made freely available. And as I started writing these papers, and if you look at my website, you'll see that all of the papers became freely available. And I started working on software, including the online learning environment known as OLE, which stands for Online Learning Environment. Even then, I was not very good at picking titles. And the principle of OLE was to create chunks of learning that we called modules, and that was a forerunner to the concept of learning objects. And I became known to people like David Wiley because I wrote a paper on learning objects, and David, of course, was very well known for the early work that he did in learning objects, and that tied me into a lot of this open courseware stuff. Time went by, and I discovered something called RSS, which stands for Rich Site Summary, and it's a way of syndicating or distributing content. And so I worked on that. I worked on a site in Alberta called MuniMall. MuniMall was intended to be a website for the distribution of knowledge, information, and resources for mayors, city councilors, and elected officials in Alberta. And again, we discovered that sharing was the way that this would work the best. We actually asked these municipal administrators, how do you learn? How do you find things out? And the municipal administrator said, well, I pick up the phone and I ask my friend. And we learned from that. And we created a newsletter for these administrators. And that newsletter was an early version of the newsletter I'm well known for today called OL Daily. I also moved to the National Research Council at that time and began work on a national learning object repository project called EduSource Canada. And my work in that project was based around the concept of the learning marketplace, a way for exchanging and sharing learning resources. Meanwhile, I continued to work at the National Research Council. I built something called the referrer system, which made me very popular on the internet, and at the peak I was getting 800,000 hits a day, which was, well, very hard on my server. But the referrer system was interesting because it was the first example that I know of something called the tag hack. And I'll come back to the topic of the tag hack later on. I also developed something called EduRSS. And EduRSS still works today. And it's a system that aggregates content from around the internet, content related to online learning and learning technologies, and presents it all in one place, and you'll see a little bit of that today as well. I created something called Ed Radio, which I thought was pretty cute, which was a forerunner to something called podcasting. And what Ed Radio did is it used RSS feeds and MP3 audio files and presented them together, and so I got involved in podcasting. Around 2005, 2006, I began to look more specifically at online content creation, things like blogging. I wrote an article called Educational Blogging. I looked at things like identity, personal identity, because I'm a very lazy person, and I got tired of typing usernames and passwords because I'd type them in 5, 10, 15 times a day. I was very tired of that, so I developed something called MIDM, which is an ID system, and now that is leading to something, and I'll talk about it again, called Open ID. And I mixed together the idea of a blogging engine and the idea of EduRSS to create something called RSS Writer, and I developed the concept that I'll be talking about today, learning networks. Now you may ask, why am I going through this history? And it's not to compare myself to MIT or anything like that, because I probably can't compare myself to MIT. But what I want to do is have you look at the concept of Open Courseware from the perspective of this timeline that you've just seen. And if you think about Open Courseware as it exists today, the presentation of course materials online for free, well, that's actually back. That's actually back here, similar to the Guide to the Logic of Fallacies and similar to the online course. So when I look at something like Open Courseware, I see the state of that technology as being a step that I passed through in my own life a number of years ago. And so the topic of my talk today is to take you from that place through the different technologies that have happened since then to give you an idea of where the technologies for free and open course materials will go in the future. And where they will go, of course, is Web 2.0. Now, I imagine many of you have heard of Web 2.0, and some of you may have heard way too much about Web 2.0. It's almost a cliche these days. But Web 2.0 is something real. Web 2.0 is something that genuinely expresses a trend that we see on the internet. Web 2.0 captures the idea of participation in media. It captures the idea of standards and design and remixing content, convergence between different applications. Web 2.0 is about creating your own content, distributing your own content. As I say sometimes, aggregate, remix, repurpose, feed forward. Web 2.0 is a creation of what they call the net generation. And the first and most important thing to know about the net generation is that it creates its own media. And most of what we see in Web 2.0 is the net generation creating its own media. Probably the most popular thing that we've seen online have been the weblogs that have been created. There are now tens of millions, I think something like 15, 20, 30, or who can count them, million weblogs. And that's not counting the millions of MySpace pages and even things like wikis and Wikipedia and other types of content that have been created and posted online by the net generation. And they have not stopped at content, textual content. The net generation is creating a whole range of media. They're creating photos and posting them on sites like Flickr. They are creating audio files, podcasts, and distributing their MP3 files around the internet. And then there's vodcasting, which is a bit newer, but reflected in the popularity of sites like YouTube, where they're creating their own videos and distributing those videos, again, for free online. You know, we talk about Open Courseware, and you know, we sometimes talk about thousands or maybe tens of thousands of resources, but when we look at the content that the net generation is creating, we're not talking about thousands, we're talking about millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of resources that are being put online and made available for free today. I want to talk about the core technologies of Web 2.0. These are the technologies that actually make it work. Usually when people talk about Web 2.0, they'll skip over the details, you know, social networking, blogs, wikis, la la la. But I want to focus on what techniques exactly make something like Web 2.0 possible. And the first technique is social networking. And the concept of social networking is, at heart, very simple. The concept of social networking is each person creates a list of their own friends. That's it. And social networking applications are all ways for you to make lists of friends. So if you went to a site like Orkut, for example, which was created by Google as their attempt to make a social networking site, you log onto the site, and the first thing you do is you try to find your list of friends. The same thing with Facebook. Facebook has become very popular recently. It began as an application at Harvard University to allow students to meet each other. And students like to meet each other, so it was very popular. Recently, it was opened up so that anybody, not just university students, can access it. Facebook in Canada has become incredibly popular. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users in Canada on Facebook. And it's the same sort of thing. I will get a list of friends. I have a list of friends on Facebook. They send me a message. They say, oh, I want to connect with you. And what's interesting about social networking is the network for each individual is different. I have my friends, you have your friends, he has his friends, she has her friends. All of the networks are different. There's one big network, but from the individual's perspective, each network is different. Another major innovation that characterizes Web 2.0 is a phenomenon known as tagging. In the first instance, tagging is very simple. You see a resource in front of you. It might be a photograph on Flickr. It might be a web page that you're indexing on Delicious. It might be a blog post that you've just written. And you ask yourself, what is that resource about? And you decide, it's about such and such. Maybe sky, or horses, or camels, whatever. You pick the word that you think best describes the resource. And that's very important. Previous categorization systems required that you pick from a list that some library or organization provided you. But with tagging, you just pick it off the top of your head. You just make it up. And then what happens is you allow everybody that looks at that resource to create a tag for it. And that creates clusters of tags. So for example, if there's a photograph of a horse, lots of people, when they look at that photograph, will tag it horse. Some people will tag it brown. Some people will tag it farm. But the idea now is that we're creating information about that photograph by the individual autonomous actions of each person who looks at that photograph. Another major technology that supports Web 2.0 is called AJAX, Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. That sounds complicated, but again, it's a very simple thing at heart. Normally, when we access a web page or we fill out a form online and click Submit, the website reloads the whole page. What AJAX is a set of small JavaScript functions that allow parts of pages to reload without reloading the whole page. So for example, if I want to log in to a page that has AJAX on it, I fill in the name, I fill in my password, I hit submit. The page does not reload, only the little bit with the login reloads. This is important because it allows web pages to be interactive. It allows you to have many interactions on a single viewing of a web page. So you can start creating things. You can start manipulating things. You type something in, the page changes. You type something in, the page changes. It goes back and forth very quickly. And so you have applications like Glyphy, for example, that use this kind of technology to let you draw diagrams. Or you have applications that allow you to create content without having to reload the page. You have applications like Writely, which was purchased by Google, where one person works on the page, another person works on the page. They're working on the same page at the same time. And because of AJAX, the pages update. So a person makes a change here, the other person sees the change here. So it allows for collaborative writing. Another major aspect of Web 2.0 is called representational state transfer, or REST. A lot of you may have heard of something called web services and SOAP, or Simple Online Access Protocol. What REST is the simple version of SOAP. the simple version of web services. As it turns out, web services require a lot of overhead. They require a lot of processing power. But web representational state transfers are very simple. They are resources that are organized, or structures that are represented by URLs, which means that if I have a program and I want my program to communicate with another program, what my program does is it sends a request to that URL, and the other program will send me back information. And what this does is it allows different applications to communicate with each other. It allows my application, for example, well, it allows something like, say, Google Maps to communicate with something like, say, Flickr, so that you can have a Flickr image on a Google map. That's the sort of thing that these kind of state transfers allow. In particular, in order for these kind of transfers to happen, you need a mechanism for allowing one web page or one web program to send a command to another web page or another web program. I wrote a script, and I'll show it to you a little bit later, where if you're on my page and you make a comment on something, you type out your comment, you hit submit, it doesn't go to my site, it goes to Blogger. Because Blogger, which is created by Google, uses an API, an application program interface. And because I know that API, I can write my program so that it can send content to Blogger, and Blogger knows what to do with it. Blogger puts it up as a web post. These functions taken together create a web that is very different from the web that we used to know. It takes the web from a web where we see things and we read things, where they're presented to us like content, to a web that we interact with, that we write on, that we use to create, that we use to communicate with each other. It changes from a static content-based web to a dynamic communication-based web. The final part of Web 2.0 technology is something called JSON. One of the restrictions that hampers the technologies that I've talked about previously is that they only work on one website at a time. That's a limitation that's built into browsers. What JavaScript object notation does is it allows you to take data from one site and put it on another site. So it allows websites to communicate with each other without requiring server interactions. When I talked about the referrer system, this is basically what I did. This was before JSON came around, but basically the way it worked was I had a web page, and I had at the top of the web page a little request to another service to create some JavaScript for me, and the other service created the JavaScript. So you have one website creating JavaScript on another website. This allows the content that is here to be part of the content that is here. It allows for content to mix and merge together from different sites. You might think, well, that's pretty obscure, but we never had this before. It used to be all the sites were separate, one site at a time, and they never merged together. But now the sites almost create a seamless individual experience for people. It seems like a small change, but the impact has been very significant. OpenID is a Web 2.0 technology that isn't ready yet. It's almost ready. A lot of organizations have signed up for it already. America Online has endorsed it and has provided its users with OpenID addresses. Microsoft has endorsed it. A number of other companies have endorsed it. What OpenID is very simple again. It allows each person to declare their own identity. And what their identity amounts to is a URL. So if I go to another website, instead of logging in, I provide that website with my URL. And there are different ways of doing that. I could just type it in, for example. The MIDM system that I mentioned earlier put it in the browser header, so I didn't even have to type it. But the idea is I give that site my URL. My URL is a separate website. You can see there's 3 websites there. My URL is a separate website. And when I log into this site communicates with the separate website and asks, is this person really the person behind that URL? And my website says, yes, I am, or no, I'm not, if I don't enter the right password. So the idea here is I log in once on my site, and I use that login to access all the other different sites that are on the internet. One login for the entire web. Now imagine what's going to happen when we get that. Imagine what's going to happen when you have just one identity that you choose, that you define, that works for the entire web. Now, what does this have to do with learning? Well, there's a key insight here. What Web 2.0 does, because it allows for interactivity and it allows for communication, is that it creates a network. It builds a network. And because it builds a network, it creates a system that has known properties. It creates a system that we can understand. And what becomes really important here is that the way a network learns something, the way a network becomes organized, is the same way a person learns something, the same way a person becomes organized. So there's a symmetry between the network as a whole and the network as seen from an individual point of view. And that becomes very important in the design of e-learning applications. Have I skipped? In e-learning, sorry. Oh, okay. Where this takes us is as follows. In eLearning 2.0, we do not treat learning resources as though they were static contents. Now, I'd like you to compare this to the concept of Open Courseware, where courseware seems almost static, doesn't it? The idea of eLearning 2.0 is that learning resources are not objects. They're not contents. They're not like books in a library. They're not things that you pick up and you move. Or they're not things that you store on a shelf. In eLearning 2.0, we think of learning resources more as though they were a utility. More like they're a network that you tap into. The way we tap into electricity, or the way we tap into water. The way I like to think of it sometimes is, think of learning as compared to writing. And you might think, well, that seems sort of odd, but think about writing and the way we use writing today. Anytime we want to know something, or we need to communicate something, we use some writing. Here's a sign. There's writing on this sign. It's very convenient. It's right there. We didn't have to send somebody out to a special place to do some reading and then come back and know what the schedule was. We just put the writing where we needed it. We have a cup with water. And the cup has writing on the side. The writing is where I need it. Imagine a world in which learning is like that. Imagine a world in which I could learn from the cup, somehow electronically, or I could learn from a display board, where the learning is wherever we happen to need it. And when we need it, that's when we tap into it. Imagine a world where learning is like the light. It just surrounds us. And if we need to know more, we get more learning. The concept in that picture of eLearning 2.0 has several features. One feature is that the learning is learner-centered. learning looks different for each person, and indeed each person is in control of their own learning. The learning is centered around the interests of the learner. The learning is owned by the learner. Again, imagine your relation to writing. You have writing that is unique to you. You have your own notes. You own those notes. You use writing the way you want to use writing. You don't have to use writing a certain way. You pick and choose. E-learning that is learner-centered implies learner choice. It implies the idea that people can pick their own topics, they can pick their own materials, they can choose their own learning styles. Another concept of the idea of e-learning 2.0 is that learning is immersive. Learning is not simply the transfer of information from one person to another person. It's not like this, right? It's not a person standing and speaking and presenting it to you, although that's what we're doing right now. And so what I do in order to adapt to this is this talk, this presentation is just one thing. What I do is I use this talk to create some learning, and then this goes on my website where now this talk can be available for somebody in the future in their own environment, where these slides can be available for somewhere in their own environment. This talk isn't so much the presentation of learning, it's the creation of learning resources. In eLearning 2.0, learning is connected. Again, learning isn't simply the acquisition of information from somebody. Learning is about a conversation. It's about interactions with other people. The way we learn in eLearning 2.0 is not by accumulating a set of facts. It's not by accumulating a set of mental contents. It's rather more like we enter into a community and we learn how to be a part of that community by being in that community, working in that community, communicating with other people in that community. Thomas Kuhn, who wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, described it this way. He said, learning physics is not learning a bunch of theorems and physical properties. It's learning how to do the problems at the end of the chapter. And the idea here is that learning how to be a physicist is not knowing this, and knowing this. It's thinking in a certain way. It's using a certain vocabulary. It's being a certain way. Some examples of eLearning 2.0 that have been around recently, one of them is game-based learning. And again, this is communication, this is immersion, simulation. The idea that we can use games to learn is an old idea, but what it does is it puts us into a situation where we're trying to do something, make a new level, solve a puzzle, kill a dragon, whatever, and we have to solve certain problems, and being presented in that environment makes us learn things because we need to learn these things in order to accomplish that objective. The good games force you to learn a lot, and consequently you'll find, especially young people, will spend hours and hours and hours in a game learning everything they possibly can about the game in order to solve certain puzzles. And these games very often represent aspects of reality. One game that I like a lot is called SimCity. You may be familiar with SimCity. That involves building and designing your own city. And so I've learned something about how to design a city by playing SimCity. Another game I like is called Civilization. That's a game where you try to build a civilization and compete against other civilizations. I like to take over the entire world and wipe out everybody else because, well, that's how I play games. But the thing with Civilization is it teaches you about the history of different civilizations. I learned, for example, about Dido and the Carthaginian civilization through playing Civilization 3. I never knew about them before. Another very widely talked about aspect or application of eLearning 2.0 is workflow learning or informal learning. And the idea here is that as you do your work, as you do your day-to-day job, whatever it happens to be, the learning that you need for that job is present in the environment in which you're working. It might be something as simple as an electronic performance support system, or it might be the community of practice that you tap into. You remember when I talked about Muni-Mall a few minutes ago? I asked how municipal administrators learn, and they told me, well, we call up our friends. That's this kind of learning. It's informal workplace learning. The learning that these municipal administrators have is right there in their environment. It's their telephone. That's their learning tool, is their telephone. And they pick up their telephone and they get exactly the learning content that they need when they need it. Now, we just call that calling up a friend, but that's the process. And a final major application of eLearning 2.0 that I have no doubt that you've heard about is mobile learning. And the idea here, and this has always excited me about eLearning, is that it allows us to take the learner out of the classroom and into the community, into the environment where learning is most useful. A slogan that I use a lot of the time is, in order to learn how to take care of a forest, go to a forest. In order to learn about the law, go to a courtroom. And mobile learning allows us to do this. It allows us to have the learning that we need in the place that we need it. As I was scouting around for slides for this talk, I ran across this slide, which kind of captures the idea of mobile learning. They call it mobile living, but really that's pretty much the same thing. And you can see how there's learning that involves your livelihood. There's learning that involves your community. There's learning that involves games. There's learning that involves health. So learning, when thought of as infrastructure, when thought of as a network, is all around us, and it helps us in all of these different areas. So the development of Web 2.0 leaves e-learning at a crossroads. On the one hand, it's like my early career. We've developed these tools and these systems designed to support traditional classroom-based learning. We have developed courseware. We have developed learning management systems. But on the other hand, we could be and we should be developing tools and techniques to support immersive learning, to support learning networks, to support the idea of learning as a conversation. We should be developing for dynamic, immersive living systems, not static things that sit on a shelf. The first iteration of this is blogging and user-produced media, podcasting, game modifications, other multimedia. But we move beyond that into Web 2.0 and the learning network properly. Learning that intersects our work and our home and our hobbies and our family and our health and all of these things. Learning that allows us to create portfolios of our best material. Learning that allows us to communicate with friends, to communicate with communities of practice. And what we need to make this work are simple systems. Blogger, for example, is very simple. You have a title and you have a big space where you type your post, and that's it. You hit enter, you're done. Simple. This is an example of a learning, personal learning environment that was developed on the Web 2.0 model. It's called Plex, and it's not simple, but it's a first draft. It was created by the people at CETUS in the United Kingdom. And the idea here is that Plex allows you to connect with applications that are out there on the internet. It's the first attempt to create this communications network. The idea here is that you want to collect materials from different websites. RSS is a way of representing content from those websites. And so you collect the material from all the different websites together, you join it together, maybe you filter it, and then you feed it forward. You create your output. RSS Writer is something that I created. RSS writer is something that on the far left side there, you see all the RSS feeds, and then that is combined where it says hello in nice yellow with a place where you create your own content. And what you can do is you can drag the content from other websites into the yellow. So you're actually mashing together content from other sites and bringing it together on your own site. And then at the bottom there, and you can't see it because it scrolls down, there's another button that says send this forward to Blogger. And so the idea here is this application joins other applications, and it joins other people. Here's a Web 2.0 application using JSON. And again, it's the same sort of idea where it gathers information from multiple sources, brings it together, and presents it there. You can see the tag for project-based learning, so I can go look into a database of resources. And if I find this is interesting, I want to create something with it, I can click on blog this and now create my own resource based on that resource. Now the challenge, and people were saying it even yesterday to me, well, what about quality? Well, how do you pick the right resource? Yeah, there may be a billion resources out of there, but most of them aren't useful. Really, that is the challenge of network learning, is how the network gives you the right resource. We used to use things like metadata. We used to think of resources as static resources that we can describe with information. We used to think of resources as though they were books, and we would give them bibliographical information. That's what learning object metadata is. But the new way is to use the capacity, to use the power of the network, to connect the user with the resource with evaluations of resources. If you think about it, though, this method is going to go far beyond simple evaluations of resources. With recommender systems, you can say people who liked this book also liked this book. But with this kind of thing, we will be able to say resources that look like this should be priced at such and such an amount. Or resources that look like this should be classified as being about camels. The whole idea is that once we get set up into a network, once we have a personal ID, for example, now we're able to create relations between entities, relations between resources, relations between people, events, institutions, all kinds of different things. And so what happens is we create this dense network of people, resources, events, information, and information flows back and forth through this network, and this network reshapes itself. It used to be we had rules and categories, and that's how we organized information. But in the network, the organization of information is more about finding patterns or similarities in the network. Here's a typical network, and those of you who are interested in connectionism will recognize this as an intelligent sort of network. And the idea here is that the connection between a person and a resource is a path through that network. The same network connects people with different resources. The puppy is one path through the network. The tree is another path through the network. The very same network is used to connect us to all the different kind of things that are out there. We don't need separate search systems. And the personal learning environment is best represented as a node in that network, a part of that network. And if you think about it, instead of the search being something that's out there that's done by other people, you are the search. All the actions that you undertake, all the things that you do, that becomes the search. You are the person who organizes the network. Each time you connect with a person in your social network, each time you evaluate a resource, each time you link to a web page, you draw another connection. And the network moves and shifts about to represent your personal view of the world. And that's the fundamental idea behind the personal learning environment. Your personal learning environment is in the middle, and then it connects to all these other areas of the internet. These connections self-organize. And this self-organization is governed by known principles of organization, known ways that networks behave. We understand how networks work. And so this leads us to a set of network design principles. And these principles are based on the principles of association, the ways that we know that networks behave. And you can think of them as a way to evaluate technology that's presented to you. If somebody's trying to sell you technology, you can think of them as design guidelines, ways to build educational resources. One principle is we need to decentralize. We want to build a mesh type of network rather than a star type of network, because in that mesh type of network is more reliable. We want to distribute our network. Rather than putting it all in one place, like Google, we want to put it in all kinds of separate places, because a network like that has a smaller risk of failing, and it requires small infrastructure. Google has to have big, huge buildings, but if the network is distributed, we can work with small, simple computers. We want to disintermediate. We want to remove the barriers between the person and the resource. For example, to remove the reporter from the reporting of news. Provide direct access to resources. We want to disaggregate. Courseware thinks of learning resources as bundled, as all one big package. But we want to take these things apart, because what we want to do is allow each user to rebundle them in their own way. We want to disintegrate. We want the applications to stand alone so that one application can communicate with many other applications, and it's not a part of some other application. We want to democratize. We want the individuals in the network to be autonomous, to make their own decisions. We want to foster diversity, so we have many different points of view in the network. We want to have open networks, and networks where communication and interaction are supported. We want dynamic networks, networks that change, networks that flow, networks that are like water systems or electrical systems. And we want to desegregate our networks. We don't want one network for learning, another network for hobbies, another network for the home, another network for whatever. It's all one single network. Your learning is your living. There is no distinction between learning, work, living, hobbies, or any of that. And I want to leave you with a final word, because it sounds from the talk so far that I'm talking a lot about how you should design for other people, how you should create your learning for your students, how you should create your learning for your readers. But this is not a message about what you do for other people. This is not a message on how to deliver learning. This is a message on how you learn. You should think of yourself as the node in the network. Be the node in the network. That's what it is to be learning the eLearning 2.0 way. I thank you for your time, and I thank the organizers for their patience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Downs. There's been a slight